All right, good morning. Good morning. Welcome to those of you that are here in Phoenix. We are always glad you're joining us. For those of you watching us online, apps, Roku, YouTube, any way you found us, glad you're joining us too. If you want to know more about our ministry, go online to womensbiblestudy.com. Handouts for today's lesson, past lessons. You can catch up on our series. We are working through the book of Acts. What we're doing is we've broken it up into a lot of different series so that you wouldn't have to have the same backdrop for a bazillion lessons. So right now we are working through Acts Continued, Why Did God Save Me? Because it's really, really important for us to know why God saved us. Because so many people think it's just because I'm just supposed to go to heaven, and they don't realize that you really, really got saved for a purpose. And so that's kind of what we're doing as we're going through the book of Acts. Now, before we get started, my son sent this. I don't even know if I can put this up, but we're going to do it anyway and hope I don't get in trouble. Because there's so much fake news out there. My son sent this to me. It seriously made me laugh. I hope David got it. Let's see. We'll try this.
Okay, picking it up here in Wilmington, North Carolina, right at the Intercoastal, and we're in one of these bands. This is about us dancing this next night. Then the eyeballs we're not
Look at the people walking behind him.
Raucous night at the hotel. And this wind gusting again over 60 miles an hour. He's blowing by.
Serious, that made me laugh.
This is what we're seeing, a lot of shingles coming off. You see what happens when you throw it off, it just takes off like a projectile. And unfortunately, a tree has fallen on the home here in Wilmington, killing a mom and an infant. The father was transported to the hospital with injuries. So here in Wilmington, New Hanover County, this has become a deadly hurricane now with 2 fatalities, a mom and her infant. Boy, I tell you, look at the wind just whipping the palm trees.
Okay, and my son said that we literally started laughing because it was a little on the drama for my mama side. But the funniest part was when those people were just walking behind him like, what are you talking about? That made me laugh. Okay. What we're talking about today is how the early church started, and what we want to explain, if you're new, is that what happened was Jesus died on a cross, rose from the dead, talked to the disciples for about 40 days, ascended into heaven, kind of gave everyone a heads up on what to do, how to get the message of salvation out, because Jesus is trying to explain to them, he's the only way to God. It's not through religion. It's not through being a good person. And this message now had to get out. So Jesus spent 40 days talking to the disciples to let them know, and this is what this is how he wanted to get the message out through this. Here's our next screen. People. Okay? It's really simple. Just you and me and all the people out there. Now, here's what we need to know, and this is what we're trying to really hit hard on here, is that when you and I become a Christian, it's not, like I said, just to go to heaven, but it's to say, all right, God, I'm yours. Now, use me. Our job is to get the message of salvation out into the world. So what does that look like in your life? What are your gifts? What are your talents? What are you passionate about? What are the things that have happened in your life that you can turn around and use it now to help people come to know Christ? Some of you are outgoing. Some of you are quiet. I heard the greatest story this morning. Audrey. It's the cutest thing. She said, this is not me. I go up to the QT station. She said, I took a one-way book, just happened to have it with me, walked in, asked the guy if he goes to church that was checking her out, and he goes, it's so weird that you said that because I just this morning was thinking, I need to start going back to church again. She hands him a book, and I'm like, oh my gosh, Audrey, you're my hero. Because that's the point. Just take a book, hand it out. Like, this is just our job. This is what should be just natural for us to do. Some of you like to sing like Kelly and David. Some of you are an accountant, and you can help that way. Some people just love to serve or give, whatever. And that's what God wants to use on this earth to get this message of salvation out. Now, when we're studying Acts, what we have to realize is the early disciples, this was all new to them. Like, they didn't know that this was a job for them to do. They just were used to the temple. They were used to their Jewish religion. They didn't have a New Testament. Like, think about it. They were reading what Luke was writing about them. So they didn't have what you and I have today. It was being written at this particular time. Now, what Luke is showing us is that right off the bat, that in this early church, here's what happens. Our next screen. There are problems. Lots of problems in this early church. And I want you to know today that problems are a good thing. And I hate problems. I just want things to go good and not have to worry about life. But problems are good if, in fact, you solve them. Because when you solve them, then what happens is now things are good and things have changed and they're on a different track. And so always look at your problems like that. As like once it's solved and we get a plan on what's going to happen, then we can move on and go to the next thing. So that's what's going to happen here. So let's pick up our story, Acts 6, verse 1. Now in these days, when the disciples were increasing in number, a complaint by the Hellenists arose against the Hebrews because their widows were being neglected in the daily distribution. So this is what's happening in the early church. There's two separate groups. We're going to call them cliques, okay? You had your local Hebrew Christian, they were Jewish. They lived in Israel. They lived in Jerusalem. They lived by the temple. They kind of knew the area. They were super excited. They've always lived there. And they were kind of like this group. But then you had this second group. They're Jewish Hellenist. They became Christians. So they were Jews that became followers of Christ, but they were ancestors of those that had been dispersed in the Babylonian captivity. So they wanted to come back to Jerusalem, and so when they did, there seems to be this like segregation of people, and this was it arose, this problem, because they felt that they were being neglected. Now, I want to talk really quick about cliques, because at this point you saw the Hebrews against the Hellenistics. Some of you, it's the Baptist against the Pentecostal. Some of you, it's my group against your group, my table against your table. This is my table. You can't sit at my table. Like, this is what goes on in here. You would be kind of shocked if you could understand what happens. But we all have cliques, and everyone's like sitting in your friendship clique. And what we learned today is that unbeknownst to you, you might be hurting people's feelings, okay? And you're not meaning to. It's not like you're sitting here and you're out to be like, this is my group and you can't. I don't think you even think about it. And I don't think you're doing anything on purpose. But it's this perception that people walk in and they see you and your group and they don't feel comfortable saying, hey, can I come sit at your table? So the Hellenistic Christian Jews felt that the Hebrew Jewish women were ignoring them. We saw this firsthand when we used to have our Bible study at Babos. Chris, you'll remember this. When we first started, there was probably 10 of us maybe. The problem is Chris, everyone knows Chris, she's this beautiful blonde, and then she brought her friends, Sheila and Greta, and they're all beautiful blondes, okay? So what they would do is they would sit at this table all by themselves, and it was like, we called it the beautiful blonde table, is basically what it was. And they are the nicest people in the world. Like, not one of them would ever shun you or not be welcoming, but it was the perception that if you were a brunette, you're kind of not welcome at this Bible study, apparently. So that's my point. They were not purposely ignoring them, but that is what the perception was, which brings me to my blonde joke. Okay. A blonde walked into the store and said, I'd like to buy this TV. The store clerk says, well, we don't sell to blondes. And she got angry. She went home, she dyes her hair black, she puts on skate clothes, she comes back and she says, I want to buy this TV. He said, we don't sell to blondes. She goes, it made her so mad, so she went back home, went to a barber, cut her hair all off, had him dye it black, okay, and put man's clothing on and walked in and said, I want to buy this TV. He says, we don't sell to blondes. And she said, how do you know that? This is ridiculous. I've changed my clothes, I've cut my hair, I've dyed my hair. How do you know that I'm a blonde? And he said, because that's not a TV, it's a microwave. Okay, yay! So what we did is we moved our Bible study to a movie theater because we figured tables were a problem because people weren't feeling welcome, so we would go to rows, okay? Well, that worked for a while, but then now we're back here to tables that are round, okay? So here's what I'm telling you. I just want to remind you that when people walk in here and you see a new name tag on, please be nice to them, okay? Ask them to sit with you. If they come up and say, is this seat saved? Please do not say, yes, it's saved for my friend. Say, oh, I would love for you to sit here, okay? So please, please, I cannot. A couple years ago, I almost quit over this. This is how bad it was. I had people call me all the time. I came to your Bible study and I'll never come back. Because I would come up and ask a table if I could sit with them, and they would say, no, I'm saving this for my friend. And she said, I was so uncomfortable that I left. And I was furious. And those of you that were here back then, you remember this. So I got signs that I put on your tables. And each one of the signs says, we are friendly, come sit by us. and I didn't even do it for the people walking in the door. It was a reminder to every one of these tables, like, be nice, okay? Because that's what has to happen here. But I started thinking about this on two fronts. If you are one of those that's in a clique, okay, stop it. That's what I'm telling you. Knock it off, okay? Because it's very, very frustrating. I need you to be the most loving, welcoming people ever. But if you are here and you are one of those that just walked in and you feel very, very like no one's paying attention to you and you're feeling slighted, I want you to do this. Give people grace. Because honestly, just like when we were at Babos, none of those girls were ever doing that on purpose. They would never hurtfully try to hurt someone. They want to welcome people in. But it's, like I said, it's the perception of the person walking in. And we need to give grace to people if you're the one walking in and you're like, I don't know, women are kind of mean. Because I think this, most women are not trying to ignore you or hurt you. I really think ultimately out of 100, there may be 2 that are jerks, but most of them aren't. Yeah. I remember going to a CCV one time, and for those of you that know CCV, it's probably got, 20, 30, gazillion, billion people that go there. And I don't even know how I got in this conversation with this girl. We were talking about something, and she goes, I don't think I'm ever coming back here again. And I said, why not? And she said, well, I had this really bad childhood, and so I went and I told the pastor after the service last week or whatever. I told him all about my story while he was outside, and he said, email me your story and I'll get back with you. He never got back with me. I'm going to leave the church. And I'm like, oh, for the love. Okay, do you not know that there are 30,000 people that go here? And honestly, that could just kind of slip through the cracks. He's not trying to ditch you. He's not trying, this is a big church. And when you realize that it's not about you, it's like, send your story, and God is big enough that if he wants your story told, the pastor will make sure. But stop thinking about yourself and start thinking about big picture and not all about me. When I was working on this particular lesson, I was in California, and a girl texted me, and she said, where's my Holy Land book? You told me you would send me one weeks ago. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I don't remember that, but okay. So I went back on my records, and I had this one sheet that I write stuff down on, and there it was. I forgot. It wasn't even, I didn't mean to, and I wasn't trying to be mean, but I literally forgot. So what I want to tell you is that if you always are offended by women and offended because you don't feel, just kind of give people grace. Sometimes you need to do that. Because like I said, I don't think the majority of people are out to hurt you. I remember missing my dad's birthday dinner once. Because imagine that, your dad's birthday dinner. And we were out selling candy for our kids' baseball team when they were little. Never even thought about it. And thank the Lord my dad and mom forgave me. It wasn't even like they've ever thought about it since then. But here's my point for this. Give your pastor a break. He's got a lot going on in his life. Give your husband a break. If he forgot your anniversary or your birthday, he's not doing it on purpose. He's really just overwhelmed with life, and there's a lot of stuff going on, so just don't take things so personally. It was Rob and I's anniversary last week. Neither one of us remembered. The day just went by. He was out of town. I was like, wow, what day is it today? And I looked at him the other day and I said, we missed our anniversary. And he's like, oh, that sucks. Happy anniversary. So there you go, okay? Don't get hurt about it. It's not that big of a deal. And if your children forget that it's your birthday or it's Mother's Day, yeah, I always say, stop making it about you. And I know that sounds mean. And none of you are ever going to come back because you're like, I want it to be about me. So I get that. But regardless of how these widows felt, whether they were being ignored in reality or whether they weren't, the early church needed to do something about it. It was growing so incredibly fast, and something had to be done. So that's where we ended up with verse 2. So the 12 summoned the full number of the disciples, and said this, "It's not right that we should give up preaching the word of God to serve tables." Here's what the disciples are beginning to realize in their life. They cannot do it all. They can't study and preach and organize the church and be the welcoming committee and counsel all the people that are having problems and train new believers and serve widows and orphans. There is not enough time in a day for any single person, let alone the 12 early disciples, trying after thousands are coming to Christ at a time. So they realized that the church, for it to work, they were going to have to start delegating things into other people. Please understand this. It is not that they didn't care about the widows. I believe full-heartedly Peter and all the disciples, they love these women, but they just could not take time out of their own personal day to make anything better about it. So I realized that when I started teaching here. Now, we're going to talk a little bit about seasons. Like I said, 20 years ago, I could never do what I did. We had kids at home. There was stuff going on. There was no way I could do what I could do. So I'm in a different season in my life when I can do that, since Dusty's the only one left at home right now. But most of my days are spent putting a lesson together, which, by the way, takes hours and hours and hours and hours. And then when it is put together, then I go through it and time it, and then I hate it, and then I scrap most of it, and then start over. And this is my week, okay? And so then I finally get it together on about Monday, and I time them, and I've got to make sure everything works. Then after we get that done, then I have to do handouts. David gets a specific handout for him. Any screen up here that you see, if he's not doing it, I have to send him through Dropbox. So we've got that going on. Now I have to get a whole different handout for you guys, send it off to the other people. Then I have to print them, and then I sit at nighttime on Monday nights and staple everything together to make sure we have it together for you guys. Now, the hardest part of my week comes Tuesday night when I walk in my closet. And I say, I wonder what I'm going to wear tomorrow. I wonder what's going to fit that people aren't going to yell at me about, and they're not going to say your skirt looks stupid and it's fraying and you shouldn't wear things like that, things like that. But on top of all this, Dusty still lives at home. He needs attention. My husband needs attention. Not that it's bad, but I'm married, for crying out loud. I need to help him with emails and airline tickets. And then if people order books, I have to put the orders together, and then I have to take them to the post office. And then if someone emails me or Facebook messages me or calls me, I take it myself and do all that. So anyway, I realized after I wrote all that down that I must be the biggest control freak there ever is on this earth. So I found something about control freaks. Here it is. This apparently is me. I'm not really a control freak, but can I show you the right way to do that? Oh, what's our next one? As long as everything is exactly the way I want it, I'm totally flexible. But you would be proud of me. Jane and Chris are on the front. Jane does all that stuff. I don't have to deal with it. I get the bagels in the morning, and Vicki puts them all out. Mindy over here takes donations for credit and debit. Somebody else comes in now, and I asked one of the girls last week, can you go get M&Ms for the table for me? Because I realize I have to start learning to do that. Anyway, the reason why I'm telling you that is not so that you would feel sorry for me. Anyway, I'm telling you that for a specific purpose. Because here's the deal. If you invite me someplace, hey, Lisa, can you come to my church? Hey, Lisa, we have this ministry thing. Can you come? Hey, can you come to this retreat with me? Hey, let's go to lunch. Hey, can we do this? I say no. And I feel like I understand Peter, because it's not that I don't want to go, because I would love to go and hang out with every single person here. I honestly don't have the time. And I can't, because if I'm going to do this, and I'm supposed to do this the way it's supposed to be, because now everything that I just told you I did doubles since we're doing Revelation. So my life is a disaster area right now. And on top of that, P.S., we bought a house. Yeah. Someday I'll tell you the story. We don't have time today, but it's cool, so cool. But the problem is now we have to move out of 25 years of being in the same house. Rob goes, when are we going to move? And I'm like, are you joking? I can't move. I'm staying here. You guys can move, okay? This just isn't working for me right now. But anyway, here's what the point, the whole point is that the disciples find themselves in a place where it's not that they don't love these people. They really just, something has to give so that everybody else can now do their part, because their part was communicating to the new disciples what Jesus wanted to say, what wanted them to know about what it means to follow him. And they had to do that. They can't do everything. It's my favorite joke of all times. I tell it all the time, but we have new people, so they'll laugh even if you don't. How's that? This is how some people's life feels, just totally crazy. So a guy walks into a doctor's office. The receptionist asks him what he has, and he says shingles. So she was so busy, she wasn't paying any attention, so she took down his name and address, medical insurance, told him to sit down. 15 minutes, a nurse's aide came in, takes him to his room, gets his complete history. A half hour later, another nurse comes in, takes his blood pressure, does an echocardiogram. An hour later, the doctor comes in and says, "What do you have?" And he said, "Shingles." The doctor said, "Where?" He said, "Well, they're out in my truck." I'm just wondering where you guys want me to put them. Okay, I love that. But all that to say, some of you are that crazy busy in your life that you're just not paying attention to anything because you do not have time. And so that's what I want to talk to you about today. Some of you need to get a grip on your life. And today I want the day to be that day that happens. Some of you are trying to, like the disciples, do everything. You want to be the best mom. You're trying to be the homeroom mom. You're trying to be at the basketball game and the dance team. And then you're trying to cook and clean and do laundry. And then on top of that, your church says you need to be in a small group. And then you listen to me and I say, you better be reading your Bible every day. And then your pastor's like, you better be in church Sunday. And oh, while you're at church, you need to also be serving. So you need to come 3 hours instead of 1. And honestly, on top of that, you're trying to impart all your wisdom that you're learning in all those places to your kids, and they're screaming, and your husband comes home. Need I say more? What does he want? Sex. Okay, sorry, but that's just the way it is. And so it's like something has to give, and it's not going to be sex. I'll tell you that right now. So here is my screen up here. Sometimes you have to stop the merry-go-round, all right? Here's what I want you to do. I want you to stop the merry-go-round if that is your crazy life right now. And I want you to say, all right, what is God calling me to do at this particular point and season in my life? Now, please don't hear me when I say don't go to church and don't read your Bible. And I'm not saying that. I'm all for small groups. But I honestly do think there is some times where there's a time season for that. And it might not be when you have 15 kids at home and you're trying to deal with all that stuff. Now, if you're listening and you're a pastor, you hate me right now. But my point is that Peter could not do it all. And he was in ministry. And sometimes as a mom or a grandmother trying to raise your grandchildren or however that works out, sometimes you need to stop. Rob said the other day, we need to get into a small group. I haven't been into one for a while. And I said, Rob, I could not possibly get in a small group. Because that means I have to get to know people. Not that that's a bad thing, but I don't even mean that mean. I didn't come off very good, did I? That means I have to engage and go to lunch with people and get to know them and then go to barbecues. And it's like, Rob, I do not have 5 seconds in my life to do that. And he realized it needs to be another season. Here's my thought on the next screen. Just because something is a good thing doesn't always mean it's the best thing. Okay, please grasp that. Just because helping the widows for Peter and John are a good thing. But it's not the best thing for them at that particular time. Here's what you need to know on the next screen here is life is filled with season. So you need to embrace the season that you're in, and the season you're in now is different than it was 20 years ago, and will be different than it is 20 years from now. My friend, she actually homeschooled all 5 of her kids. And it'd kill me now, serious. I was that would be my worst nightmare. But for her, God put it upon her heart to do that, and she did. And after the last one graduated, now she goes and she works full-time at another place. But that season of pouring her life and pouring Jesus into her kids is over. So we all have seasons all through our life. Our daughter, Gabby, she had our grandson, Colton. I think she was almost 40. Well, that's hard. It's hard to have a kid when you're 40. And yet she told me, she said, Mom, I just know it's a season. And Colton's going to wake up and he's going to scream and I'm going to go and I'm going to feed him and I'm going to be happy about it. Because it's not always going to be like this. So some of you that feel like you are on that merry-go-round, it's not going to last forever, but you might need to make some adjustments at the time. The bottom line is this: whatever God is calling you to do for the season that you're in, here's what I want you to do. Don't be distracted. Let's put that little thing of that little video up because this kind of made me laugh. This is what happens when you get distracted. Those are knives. Seriously, okay. You're going to get hit in the head with a knife if you're distracted. So don't be distracted where you're at because it's easy to do. There was a farmer one morning who told his wife, he says, I'm going out to pluck ripe fruit from the field. He got off to an early start. He went to go head towards his truck to warm it up, and he realized he forgot he needed gas. So he went into the barn to go get some gas, but then he looked over and noticed the pigs hadn't been fed. So he went to go get pig feed, and as he was there, he saw all these potatoes that were sprouting right next to it. So he's like, oh, I need to grab the potatoes and go to the potato pit. And so as he was walking there, this ailing chicken walked by, and he didn't know what to do. So he picked up the chicken, and then as he was walking, he looked over and saw a wood pile, and he's like, oh my gosh, my wife needs wood for the house, for the stove. And by this time it's noon, and he's never even made it to his car or his truck. And so nothing got done, and the ripe fruit that he was going to pick had all gone bad. Now, that depicts a lot of our life. I try to study as much as I can away from home because I'd be like, oh, I forgot to do this. Oh, I need to do that. Oh, I have to do laundry, which of course that never happens. Oh, I forgot to take the dishes out of the dishwasher. And this goes on all day long. So it's like I had to get away from everything so that I won't be distracted. But some of you need to stick to what you're supposed to be. And maybe that's a stay-at-home mom right now. Maybe that's a grandma who watches her kids. Maybe that's the season of your life. Maybe it's just the woman who just loves to just take care of her home for her husband and her kids. It's just a season that God has you in. And I want you to understand this. Do not be distracted by pressures of other people. I want you to realize that your friend, your pastor, your small group leader, your Bible study leader, everyone's very, very well-meaning about what should happen to you in your life and what you should be doing. But you need to sit down and say, God, where do you want me for this season of my life? Because I don't know where it is, but this is a season, and I need to be the best I could possibly be for you. Now, for some of you, if you don't do anything and you sit home and you watch soap operas and you watch watch soap operas and eat bonbons, there you go. If you do that all day long and you're like, yeah, I can't go to church, or no, I can't go to Bible study, and you have nothing else going on in your life, you need to get over that, okay? Because I'm not talking to you. I'm talking about those that love Jesus with all their heart and realize that their life is about serving on this earth so that other people can come to know Christ. And in that process, if you're sitting around watching soap operas and eating bonbons, then you need to get out there and do something, is what I'm telling you. But for those of you that are overwhelmed with life, you need to start figuring out what God is calling you to do, not other people. Here's our next screen. Be careful who you listen to. Because here's what happens. You all are sitting in your little cliques. We already talked about that earlier. And you talk about people and you hear things. And here's what your conversations are. Betty should be working in the nursery. Like, really? What is she doing with all of her time? Carla, why isn't she at Bible study today? What's going on in Carla's life? Linda, she hasn't been to our small group for 3 weeks. What's going on with Linda? And we go all judgmental on these women, and yet you have no idea that Betty's kids have been sick for 2 weeks. And she had to take time off work, and now she's trying to do overtime just to pay the bills because she's a single mom and can't afford to pay the mortgage. Most of you don't know Carla is overwhelmed with school because she's trying to be a nurse so that she can do something to attribute to her income, her family's lifestyle. Most of you don't know that Linda is so exhausted from just keeping up with her husband and their business and household things that, you know what, the best thing Linda needs is to just go home and go to bed at night. And small group just is just something she's just too overwhelming. And that's the problem. We just think that we say bad things about people and we look at their life and we don't look what's beyond what's going on. And I think that was going on in the early church. Think about what people were saying about Peter and James and John. Here's their conversation. I can't believe those widows are hurting. And if Peter and John could get out from behind their desk and go and see the soup kitchen, they would understand what's going on. I mean, really, how much time does it take to put a little lesson together so that they can teach it in the synagogue? Like, this is ridiculous. Who do they think they are? They should be doing something about it. Here's our problem. Here's our next word. They. We all sit around and say they should be doing something about it. Who's they? The pastors. They get paid for it. They should be doing something about it. And somehow we've missed the place that it should not be they, but here's our next word. It should be we. They should not be saying, oh, they should be going to the soup kitchen. We should be saying, we should be going to the soup kitchen. I understand they're teaching, they're doing what they can do, but now it's my job. What can I do to be part of this team that's going to get the message of Jesus out? I saw this. I can't remember. I think I told you this up before, but I can't remember if I did or not. I don't know, 6 months ago, I think it was the end of last year, Sue in here, wherever you are, she, if you notice, the Jehovah Witnesses are always out in the front out here, and she has always studied Jehovah Witnesses, and so she decided that if she's going to have an audience with them so she can share the gospel with them, she would have to befriend them. So she ends up going and talking to them, and every day she goes out there and asks questions, and it's kind of like becomes friends with them. Well, she called me one day, and she said, Lisa, she said, one of the ladies out there had a stroke. And she said, do you think we could get 14 women to take meals over to her one day for 14 days, or one day each person, one day for 14 days? And I'm like, okay, we have what, 140? At the time we had 140, 150. I don't know how many women were in here, but my thought was this. 14? Like, we should have enough meals for 2 months for this woman. Like, we need to go, and I knew it wasn't my gift. I don't even cook for my family, so I knew I was not going to be on that list, okay? But I know some of you don't want to do this, but you love to cook. That's so fun to you. So I'm thinking we got our sign-up sheet, and we were super excited about that. How many people? Guess how many people took dinner over? 3. 3. I was so discouraged. Because I kept thinking, what am I missing here? I keep trying to tell people that we're here not to just come here and eat bagels and donuts and not do anything. Like, we're hoping to learn something so that we can go out and serve other people and help other people. But we automatically think when we see lists like that someone else is going to do it. And here's what I want you to know. No, they're not. Okay? I tell people all the time, please donate $5 every time you come here. I tell people online, please just donate $5 a month. Nothing. And it's so shocking. I'm like, hello, if everyone could just do their part, that would be so awesome. But unfortunately, as I'm talking, I'm realizing no one's coming back next week. You're like, Lisa was mad at me today, and she just like railed on me. I'm really not. I'm really just trying to explain to you what the early church, what their problem was. And it's no different then than it was today. There's always whining, and there's always just like someone else should do it, and I want you to know that they don't. Here's what our next screen is. As a Jesus follower, we all have a part. If you are sitting here and you say, I'm a Christian, there's something that you're supposed to be doing in the group or the area that God has placed you in. Here's our next screen. We have to figure out our part and then go do it. I spend time studying at home so I can teach. Sandy spends time going and finding bags so that she can take them down to the homeless on the weekends. Some of you do cook meals. Those 3 of you, you're my heroes that you took meals over to this lady. Some of you visit people who are sick. Some of you honestly give lots of money in here because you know most people can't or won't. And so everybody has a part. And here's how the gospel got out in Acts in the first century. Here's our screen. The message of Jesus got out because of the we, not the they. We got to get that. It's not about they, the pastors, those people. It's about we, which is me and you. And we all have a place, but we all have different places. And God did that on purpose. He made us all have different places in life because getting the message of Jesus out into a world is a huge, huge project. And so God needed people in the accounting office and pilots and school teachers and stay-at-home moms so you can hang out with your neighbors and your friends. He needs Christians as nurses and dentists, and he needs Christians in retirement communities. That's just the way he works this whole thing. We all have to be a part of the sphere he has placed us. And I shouldn't do what God has asked you to do, and you should never be asked to do what I do. It just doesn't work that way. But the problem is some of you feel so much pressure to do things that you aren't even called to do. My friend Erin, one day, she's this, not, I was going to say control freak. She's not. She's a, what's it called when you organizationalized? So she's very organization. Everything is about organization to her. Everything has a place. Everything has a folder. And so I had her come over one day and I said, look, I have all these lessons and they're just everywhere. And I said, I need to get organized. They're all in this closet. Will you help me? Okay, that is her happy place. She came over and you would have thought we were at like Disneyland. She took that hold of this closet. She put everything out. She told me how to clean. She said, you have a giveaway pile, a throwaway pile, and we're going to put this back in an organized pile. Okay, so she gets here. She starts doing this. An hour later, I'm like, can we go eat? Okay, I'm hungry. This is boring. This is the stupidest thing I've ever heard. Let's just shove it all back in the closet and just forget about it, okay? Because that's the way I do things in my life. And she's like, absolutely not. This is what she said. You can go to lunch. I'll stay here and finish this for you. That wasn't very nice. Anyway, we finished the closet, but here's the deal. I would never, ever ask her to come and do this because she told me one day, I could never do what you do. And I'm like, I can never do what you do. I cannot be organized if my life depended on it. Cheyenne came to me one day and she goes, I was studying and she goes, how do you do this? You literally sit with books and a computer for hours at a time. How do you do that? She goes, I would go nuts. And I said, because it's what God has called me to do. He hasn't called you to do that, so go do what God's called you to do. See how that works? We're all a team. Greg Surant says this. We'll read this together up here. I think we've got that one. How many of you know should-bes will kill you? Have you ever had somebody fired up about an issue? They're passionate about it. They think you should be equally passionate. You should be involved. He said, I get that all the time. You should be more interested in the Middle East, or you should be more involved in politics, or you should care more about abortion, or you should care more about the poor. You should care more about, he said, you just fill in the blank. You should be. Because somebody is fired up about it, and that's good. We need to be fired up, but we need to understand the Holy Spirit gives us passions, and you need to find people who have the same passions. Don't put your shoulds on somebody else. I love this. I won't should on you, and you don't should on me. Like, okay. So the apostles, when they realized that all this needed to be done, here's what they got up and said after. No, time out. That's not who God created us to be. It's a good thing we all don't do the same thing. That's not the way to fix it. In other words, it's not the way to fix it to just go and say, all right, I'll go to the soup kitchen and I'm going to help out. It's not their gift mix. It's not what they're supposed to do. And had they done that and just gone along with the crowd, did what everyone thought that they should do, think of where we would be doctrinally. Maybe they wouldn't have had the time to spend to read the Old Testament, to figure out what Jesus is saying, to write down all these letters that they were getting out to people, Philippians and Colossians and Romans and all of these things. What if they would have taken the time and said, never mind, I don't want people to be mad at me, so I'm going to go do this. Don't do that. Do what God is calling you to do in the time period that you're at. How did they solve this problem? Here's our next screen. They released the church to solve the problem. Look at verse 3. We're never getting through Acts if we do it this slow, are we? You guys are all probably thinking the same thing. We've made it 3 verses. Therefore, brothers, pick out from among you 7 of good repute, full of the Spirit and of wisdom, whom we will appoint to this duty. And here's what he's saying. I'm calling you to go do something for God. But here's what you need. You need to have a good reputation. You need to be filled with the Spirit, and you need to be wise. That is not just for the early church. That is for you, and that is for me. And that's what we have to realize, is that people are watching us. Your reputation follows you. If you are a stay-at-home mom or if you are a lawyer, you better watch what you're doing, because other people seriously know if you are living a follower of Jesus' life, they know what you should be acting like. The Rose Bowl contest in 1929, Roy Riegels wanted his team to win desperately. The score was tied. This crucial moment, he scoops up a loose ball and he just starts running. He cuts in and out of traffic and he makes it all the way down to the 1-yard line. And he's tackled by his own teammate because he was running the wrong way, okay? And it's the funniest thing, because how sad for him, but that reputation never left him, ever. Like people go, oh, Roy, wrong way Regals. Like that, he's known for that to this day. And so I want you to realize that your reputation follows you. It matters to those. If they're seeing you get drunk, if they're seeing you have an affair, some guy pulls up in your driveway and he's not your husband 3 days a week and they know something's going on. Like people are watching you. So if you're following Jesus, understand that your reputation is of utmost importance. He said they're filled with the Spirit, which means if you're filled with the Spirit, you're walking your days going, God, how can I live a life that's going that you want me to live? Filled with the Spirit means you're loving people, you're being kind, you're being, patient with them, you're being helpful, you have self-control. These are all of the things that come along with being filled with the Spirit. So we have to ask ourselves, is that me? Am I consistently filled with the Spirit during the day? And then you should be wise. And the only way you and I are going to get wise is to open the Bible and see what God's wisdom really looks like. So that is a qualification for any job that God has for us. You need to know your gifts, you need to know your strengths, and you need to know what you're passionate about it. And then here's your next screen here. Then you need to go for it. Whatever that looks like. Say, God, whatever it is that I can do to get the message of you out to other people, I'm just going to do it. Because that's what you are looking for. But I want you to know this right now. Most people think that means you have to be in ministry, that you have to be a missionary in Africa, you have to be work for Feed My Starving Children. Okay, none of that is true. Okay, it could mean raising babies and toddlers to be teenagers who love Jesus. That may be your place in life right now. It could mean working full-time and being a light to those around you. Some of you, your husbands have business, you're business owners. That's a whole new ballgame with a whole new set of problems that go along with that. But that could be your season in your life right now. And you say, God, you've placed me here. How can I be the best, with the best reputation, filled with the Spirit and wise to my employees, to those around me? How can I promote you to the place that I work? See how that works? Here's what I want you to know. Do not be pressured by someone else. You got to get this, because we all have people that tell us what we think that they think we should do. I went to a Bible study many, many years ago, sat there and listened as the woman got up and said this. You need to grow your own garden. If you want to be a good Christian woman, you get out there and grow your own garden. Because your family should be the most important thing in your life. And you want to feed them fresh broccoli and fresh carrots and fresh radishes. Okay, and oh, by the way, if you have someone that comes and helps clean your house for you, you need to fire them. Because here's the deal. If you're going to pour your heart and soul into being the best Christian wife and mother, you need to train your kids up to show them how to do that. Okay. Who feels like the worst Christian in the world walking out of that? Me. I walked away and I was like, are you kidding? Okay, we had 7 kids. We had half of them were in high school in football. I was studying the temple in Jerusalem for a Bible study. I'm sitting at a football game studying all these books, trying to watch my son play. I wasn't cooking dinner because no one had time, so it was like, do you want Taco Bell or Chipotle? I don't know what you guys want, but it's clearly not going to be a home-cooked meal for a very long time. And honestly, I have a lady come in a couple hours a week because she changes sheets and does laundry because my kids would be naked. Okay, that's what that would have looked like back then in my life. So this lady, whoever she was, got up and told me I was the worst Christian in the world and the worst mother in the world, and I was doing everything wrong. Here's the deal. Don't be defeated by what others say. Do what God is calling you to do. And at that season, it was Taco Bell and Chipotle and someone helping me in my house. And you know what? If she didn't like it, she needs to get over it. Okay, here's the deal. Here's our next point. If you are frustrated in your Christian life, you may not be serving in the right place. If you told me you need to go work in the nursery at church, I'd be like, are you kidding? I don't even I love my grandchildren. I don't even like to hang out with that didn't sound right either. I love to hang out with my grandchildren. I just don't do it, okay? So that's that was my point. I love my grandchildren, okay? David, you're going to have to strike that out of there. I didn't mean to say that. I love my grandchildren. I love to hang out with them. I just don't do it very much. A lot of it's just because of time, and they all have their own lives and whatever that goes on to that. But here's the deal. Some of you aren't serving in the right position, so you're miserable in your life. Okay? Find out what it is that you love to do and go do it. Stop listening to other people. Rob read a book one time called Good to Great. Talked about an employer who had a company, and it's like a bus. And each one of your employees are on a specific seat on the bus. Like, I look at Chris, and I think, Chris is on the right place on the bus because she loves to greet people, and she just loves people. So the right place on the bus is she's out front. Jane, she's so organized. She's like my friend Erin, and she gets here early and puts everything together. And this is just, they're in the right seat of the bus, but some of you may not be. And you're miserable because you're not serving where you're supposed to serve. So that I would say this, a chef isn't going to want to be a tree planter. A nurse isn't going to want to be a pilot. A doctor does not want to go be a store manager at Walmart. I mean, that's just the way that it works. So find the place that you're supposed to be. The guy that wrote that a little while ago, Greg Surrant, he said he had met with a friend who had a business, and his friend said, everything's falling apart. Everything's falling apart. My lead guy left me. He said, I don't know what to do. A couple weeks later, Greg got back together with him, and he said, you know what? This problem was the best thing that ever happened because I realized something. I hired a general manager who was just like me. And we're visionaries. And when we're visionaries, everything's chaotic. And I lost this guy because he couldn't stand the chaos. He said, so what I did is I hired someone completely opposite from me, somebody who could take all the chaos and make order out of it. And he said, my guy came back because he said, I just didn't like all the chaos around here, but now I can work here because I love the company. You have to be on the right seat of the right bus. And that goes the same way if you're a Christian and you go to church. Find the place where you're supposed to be. Here's our next screen. To show everyone what? They would have to find their place and do their part. Not the they of like, oh, you're pastor, but they meaning we. To show everyone that they or we would have to find our place and do our part. So Peter goes on to say this in verse 4, but we will devote ourselves to prayer and to the ministry of the word. And what they said pleased the whole gathering, and they chose Stephen, a man full of faith, and the Holy Spirit, and Philip, and a bunch of other names, and Timon, and Parm, whatever. Verse 6, these they set before the apostles, and they prayed and laid their hands on them. But look what happened when these guys went out and took care of the widows and the orphans because they were filled with a good reputation, filled with the Spirit, and wise. Verse 7. And the word of God continued to increase, and the number of disciples multiplied greatly in Jerusalem, and a great many of the priests became obedient to the faith. Why? Because everyone was on the right seat of the bus, and everybody was doing their particular piece, and then the church grew like it was supposed to. Jeff Strite, the Church of Christ at Logansport, wrote something. I thought it was brilliant about this whole idea of taking care of widows. We'll read this. He says, now I'm convinced that if you were ever to go just about to any church growth seminar, you would never, ever, ever hear that a great way for the church to experience dynamic growth would be for them to take care of widows and orphans and the needy. You're not going to hear that. Like, oh, we just need to take care of the orphans and the widows and it'll all be great. It wouldn't be a cutting-edge kind of teaching. I would be willing to bet that you'd never hear this proposed, and yet that's precisely what we read here in Acts 6. When they met the needs of the widows, the disciples multiplied greatly. Now, what you hear often from many church growth experts is that a church needs to know who they're going after. A successful church, we're told, needs to have a target audience. A church needs to decide who they're going to target so they can focus all their advertising, methods, activities on that target group. Are they going after the millennials or young families or upwardly mobile business folks? Once they know who to target, they know how to market themselves for the specific group. He said that this attitude annoys him because he said Jesus never, ever did that. He didn't wake up and say, today I think we're going to just go talk to the millennials, guys. He didn't do that. He had one target audience, sinners and lost people. Jesus said in Luke 19:10, the Son of Man came to seek and save that which was lost. Luke 5:32, I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners. Jesus never went after the rich and the powerful, or he didn't tailor his ministry to married couples or the millennials. He spent time with everyday people, your neighbors, your coworkers, your family. With this he said, come to me, all you who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest. God is all about us going out and serving people. That is how the early church grew. This was interesting, and I'll end on this whole next section here. Here's our next screen about that. This is how the early church grew. There you go. And then they did it by helping other people. Rodney Starks, he wrote a book called, and this is so interesting, The Triumph of Christianity, How the Jesus Movement Became the World's Largest Religion. Now think about that. How did this happen? This early church, there's what? Like I said, 120 in the upper room, and then the 12, and they all went out, and then suddenly 3,000 people show up, and now 2,000 years later, there's so many believers all over the world. How did that happen? But there was this phenomenal growth in the first few centuries. So how did this happen? Because now you're dealing with Rome and the Roman Empire. And here's the deal with Romans. The Romans thought completely different than Christians. But the Christians stepped up and did something that nobody else would do. Here's the two different things that they both believed. One, Romans, and the Romans feared death. Romans were terrified of death. They thought they would go into some underworld existence or no existence at all, so they clung to life. And they wouldn't let anybody sick near them because they're like, I don't want to get sick. So which brings us to the second point here. The Romans viewed mercy and pity as things to be scoffed at and ridiculed. So you have the Romans who think pity is horrible and we're scared to die, so they want nothing to do with this new Christianity who comes in and says this on the next screen. Okay, Lisa needs to rewind here for 1 second. Here's what happened. The Romans thought that way. In AD 165, a plague struck the Roman Empire. And now when this plague struck, everyone in the city left. Non-Christians left, and this is what they did. They deserted those who began to be sick, fled from their dearest friends. They cast them out into the streets. They were half dead, and like the dead, like refuse unburying. But the Christians, many of them didn't do that. They stayed. And the reason why they stayed is because they didn't think like Romans. Here's how they thought. First one, Christians didn't fear death. They never were afraid to die because you and I know as followers of Jesus, when we die, we're going to heaven. And we go to heaven, it's so much better there than it ever was here, so why would we be afraid of that? We should be excited for that. And Christians in that day and age knew that. Here's the second thing. Christians knew mercy was what Jesus had called them to. And so what they did in this plague is that they stayed. All the Romans, the doctors left, but the Christians stayed. And they stayed and helped people and gave them food and water and compassion. And when the Romans saw the Christians' willingness to help them, they too became followers of Christ. And here's our next screen. The early church grew because the way Jesus wanted it to grow, because they all had the same priorities, is being a servant. Finding out your place, what you're supposed to do in the place that God has you, and then do it. And be so gracious and loving and kind, and you will be amazed at how the church will grow. So here's our 3 things we learned today. Here's the first one. Some of you need to get off the merry-go-round and enjoy the season. God has given you guilt-free. Stop feeling guilty if you can't do everything. Do what he's calling you to do for this time period. Second one, I told my kids the other day, I asked one of them, they travel all the time, and I finally said to one of them, I said, are you in a small group? And he goes, well, we're getting ready to do this and that with the church. And I said, you need to stop it. I said, you know what? For this time period, you got little kids. You should sit home and watch TV with your wife and kids around you. Like, I know that sounds really stupid, but it's like sometimes you need to just pour your life into what God's calling you for the moment. Second place, some of you need to do what you feel God is calling you to do, not what other people think you should do. Get off that whole thing that says, someone thinks I should do this. No, do what God's calling you to do. And then the last one is some of you need to ask yourself, what is my passion? So many of you are sitting here and you're doing nothing. And it's not because you just don't know what your passion is. What are you passionate about? And whatever that is, say, all right, God, I'm going to take my passion, go do something, get involved with the gardening group or the horse show group or the dog grooming group. I don't know what groups are out there. And then start sharing your faith with people. That's what God's calling us all to do. And then the last verse 8, and Stephen, full of grace and power, was doing great wonders and signs among the people. And I think it all stemmed because the church is growing because Stephen did what God was calling him to do, which is what God calls us to do, serve others. Please know this, it's not about us. It's always about him. Father, thank you for your word. Thank you for this early church and just knowing they have problems just like we have problems. But God, help us to walk out of here today and say, wait a minute, I'm making my life about me. God, I want to make my life about you, to promote you to a world that is lost and dying. I pray for that for each one of us in Jesus' name. Amen.